And welcome back from lunch. I hope you had nice conversation and made new connections during our lunch break. We are now starting our next session, Climate Justice, the Pathway to a Sustainable Future for All. The world looks for a united response to climate change. To adapt to and mitigate the effects of climate change, urgent interventions and transformative change is needed and must be addressed together with rooted inequities. This calls for just and fair transitions and underlines the importance for policies, initiatives, to not leave any critical voices out or to leave anyone behind. So again, welcome back to lunch and this next session. My name is Susanna Israelsson and I am one out of 3 trainees here in the Sami Council and the Filling the EU-Sámi Knowledge Gaps project. I work at the Arctic Environmental Unit together with the team on that unit and my mentor, Gun-Britt Vetter, and I will help you through this session today. We have a 2.5-hour program ahead of us, including a 20-minute break. And we will hear speakers and panelists from Sápmi and EU discussing climate change, the impacts of response measures, and the importance of justice in our work towards the future. But first, let me thank the hosts for this session. We have Ms. Alvina Alametse and Erik Bergqvist, both members of Parliament. And we want to thank you for arranging this session together with us. And now I would like to give the floor to Sara Elvira Kuchmanen to open the session for us.
Thank you. Yes. When I got the question to work on this session, I was really happy because this is one of the most important issues. I think because it's affecting every part of our culture in Sápmi. The York that I am going to York, the name is We Speak Earth, and it's made of one of my biggest role models in Sami music, Sara Group. She made this on her way to one of the UN conferences of climate, COP21, I think it was. Yes, so We Speak Earth. Kuulla olla ääntämään.
There are 20 spots left for the dance performance later today. And if you're interested in participating in that, you could go to my colleague Emily. Yes, or my colleagues there in the Secretariat to have more information about that. And those who have registered for this event should have gotten a confirmation email from Check Tickets. So please check your inbox for that if you have registered for this event. So moving on to our first presentation of this session, Mikael Kokmanen is the chair of Sirkes reindeer herding community in the Swedish side of Sápmi. He is a reindeer herder and committed to the promotion of Sami reindeer herding rights. Kokmanen is an advocate for Sami rights in the context of climate change. He wants to raise awareness of the consequences for Sami culture and livelihood of investments made in the name of the green transition. So Mikael, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. This wasn't really what I expected myself, because the young lady who was opening, it was my daughter, and she's one of two persons that can make me nervous. She and my wife. We always used to be nervous when she will perform something, so now you know that. The first thing that came in my mind when I heard about the green transition, it was the butterflies. In Sweden we say, when you're excited, that you have butterflies in your belly. And I think our brothers and sisters from Finland, they probably don't know what I mean, because it is impossible to have butterflies in your belly. In the Sami language we say like it is. The intestines tickles. Now you from Finland probably understand what I mean. It sounded good. The green transition. But from a Swedish perspective it sounds very good. But if you look at it from our perspective, from the Sami perspective, from the reindeer herding community, from the reindeer husbandry, it is terrible. We are very afraid of what is going to happen with this transition. I don't really like to say the word green. It don't feel so good. For us it's black. It's a black transition. I was talking about butterflies. There is a worm, a green worm, birch worm. It eats the leaves from the birches. And if there will be too many of them, they eat all the leaves from the trees, so the trees die. And I have the same feeling with the green transition. And I shall continue to talk about butterflies. The birch worm, it becomes a butterfly that is white or grey. It is because it lives the life on birches. But for about 150 years ago, during the Industrial Revolution in England, there came black butterflies from the birch worms. Because the birches got black and white butterflies couldn't survive. They were easy prey for birds. So they adapted themselves and became black. Where I live in Jokkmokk. I have my grazing area for the ranges by the Luleå River. We're affected a lot from the hydropower industry. And now these days we have a lot of consultation about the green transition. From somewhere the electricity must come. And now they are going to build 3 new power lines from our area. And this will destroy a lot for our ranger husbandry. We have enough problem with the forest industry and other things. It will fragmentize our grazing areas. And this becomes a vicious circle because the reindeers need even more and larger areas to find food. And it is areas that soon no longer will exist. And then we have one big issue. I think you all have heard about the Gallok mine. 22nd of March, that decision came from the Swedish government. It was the same day. There was a man, his name is Apmut Ivar Koljok. It was his birthday. He's over 90 years old. I think that must be the worst birthday present he has ever had. And they say that they must open this mine in the name of the green transition. So I say it again, there is no green transition. We call it, the Sami people, and now I think, or I know I speak for all of us, we call it the black transition. It is a black transition. And my worst fear is that we are going to see these black butterflies in our area. And I think we will do that if the green transition, the black transition will go on. Thank you.
Gito, Mikael, and thank you for sharing your story and experience and thoughts on what is happening in the moment. Our next presenter is Anni-Sofia Nitivuopio. Anni-Sofia is the chair of the Youth Council of the Sami Parliament in Finland. They work as a reindeer herder and has worked with Sami language education, and in the last few years, they have worked especially with indigenous people's rights in the context of climate change and to promote Sami knowledge among majority society. Anni-Sofia will give us a presentation on the demand for a just future for Sami youth. Anni-Sofia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Now I have butterflies in my stomach from your speech. It was really touching. Thank you. Dear participants, dear Sami siblings, I am pleased to be here speaking to you about a just future for Sami youth. Sami youth are extremely worried about their future by the effects of colonial politics, racism and climate change. Sami youth are feeling somewhat tired, hopeless and left alone. But of course we do still look into the future with hope and together. But it's not an easy path to hold your traditions and identity in a society that actively fights against your rights, identity and future. In the Nordic countries, hate speech and racism against Sami people is not often recognized in the national laws, yet alone in the international laws, as it is shown in stereotypes, land rights, self-determination, and denying cultural and language rights. And we need actions against these hate speeches that Samis face daily. And these issues need to be addressed by the lawmakers in the local, national, and international level. We also see that main populations do not have enough information about Samis, as we heard here before today. And that is tightly connected to the hate speech we receive. We need more projects and changes to the education systems to include obligations to teach about Sami people, to increase correct information and reduce the hate speech, bullying, and discrimination against Sami youth. And I see that the pressure for these obligations needs to come also from the EU level. But why am I speaking about this when the subject is just future and climate justice? It's because these issues are all connected to each other, to the well-being of Sami youth and our lands. Climate change is currently our biggest threat, and we need actions. Especially it's a threat to indigenous peoples in the Arctic, as the climate is warming 3 times as fast in the Arctic. Our languages are connected to the traditional livelihoods, our traditional handicrafts are connected to the other livelihoods, and our livelihoods are connected to the land. If we lose one, we lose all. One quite good example of how climate change is impacting our daily lives is that we have these traditional shoes called nuuhtohasat, and these shoes are made for really cold and dry weathers. But now we see less and less of these weathers, and we see less and less of these shoes. We see part of our culture and people's livelihood disappearing in front of our eyes. Last fall, we organized this Nordic Sami Youth Conference, and we recognized there the interest in our lands for transitioning away fossil fuel energy. As wind power and hydroelectric companies find our lands suitable for their energy producing. Our lands have been used to destroy the nature, to hasten climate change, and now these lands are demanded to stop the climate change, and we do not consent to these actions. We demand climate justice and land acknowledgement. But what is a just future for Sami youth? Is it adapting to the norms named by others? Is it giving up our languages, our culture? Is it giving up the life we live as it is a daily fight? No, it is not. It most certainly is not. It means recognizing the discrimination that rainbow Samis, disabled Samis, reindeer herders, hunters receive. It's us being in the EU, in the United Nations, in the parliaments of our countries, but most importantly, it means our own parliaments, our own institutions, our own decisions. Just future means also fully protecting the 80% of the world's biodiversity protected by indigenous peoples. That includes also the Sami home area. It means training programs, especially for Sami youth in the European Parliament, for future decision makers and activists to be part of the organizations and institutions impacting our lives, but also being the one voting and regulating. We Samis live in our one nation in 4 states. We have our own history, way of life, and the right to self-governance. We also have the right to economic, social, and cultural progress, which is based on our way of life and our values. Dear participants, dear EU, we need your help. We need your support to regulate laws that do not recognize the racism and discrimination Samis face, against the laws that allow our lands to be sacrificed to mines, loggings, and green colonialism. To fight the climate change and to face the changes that cannot be revoked, but only adapted to. To our languages and culture to be as colorful, lively, and diverse as it is now. I want to quote the Sami Youth Conference. We have the right to future, and the future needs to be made by us. Together, we have the power to make a just future for Sami youth. Thank you.
Kiitos, Anni-Sofia, for painting the big picture here and highlighting the other impacts, for example, impacts on health that might follow with other processes, such as climate change, and the impacts of the response measures coming from mitigating climate change. So thank you so much. Our next speaker that I would like to welcome is Mr. Michael Mann. Mr. Mann is the EU Special Envoy for Arctic Matters at the European External Action Service. Prior to that, he was the EU's ambassador to Iceland, and he has also been the head of the strategic communications at the European External Action Service. Mr. Mann has also worked as a European Commission spokesperson, covering a wide range of portfolios. Mr. Mann will touch upon the new Arctic policy and how to walk the talk. So, Michael, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, and it's great to follow 2 such heartfelt presentations, and it's quite difficult to follow 2 such heartfelt presentations, I'll be honest. Let me first congratulate the Sami Council on the excellent initiative of organising this Sami Week in Brussels. I think it provides an invaluable occasion to exchange views with policymakers, but perhaps even more importantly to raise awareness more widely about the rich history and culture of Sápmi. I hope it will be a huge success. It certainly seems to have been a huge success so far, and perhaps it can turn into a regular event. Just to look back, the first day when I took this job back in April 2020, I had a briefing meeting with my colleagues who deal with Arctic matters. And they told me many things, and it was obviously a lot to take in for a newcomer to the post. But the thing that stands out most is their very strong advice that I should always remember the interests, the views, and the knowledge of the Arctic's indigenous peoples, including Sami people, in everything that I do. That message has, I think, stood me in good stead, and I hope that we've been able to be true to that. Not least in drawing up our updated Arctic policy, which we published in October last year. Clearly, the Sami people have a special place in their states and in the EU. Before I get specifically into the topic of today's session, I'd like to first pay tribute to the recently released Sápmi EU strategy that we have received and acquainted ourselves with. It's an important document from a number of angles, giving a fascinating overview of key issues that the Sápmi leaders wish to draw attention to in the Sami's relationship with the EU. It lists a number of concrete proposals, and they, of course, raise a number of issues. As we all know, the EU interacts and works with a wide range of interlocutors and partners, some of them states, overseas countries, territories, multilateral organisations, as well as civil society groups. And the EU's cooperation with third parties can take on many different shapes, including bilateral dialogues, association agreements, partnerships, and many more forms besides that. In every one of these relationships, we of course have to carefully reflect how to identify specific arrangements and how those can work best. The Sápmi EU policy paper is an impressive piece of work. And obviously, this is the EU, things take a while, so we can't make immediate commitments at this point, especially as many of the suggestions you make require funding and some high-level decisions. But I can say that over the coming months, we will give your proposals careful consideration amongst all of the different colleagues with input to play into this process. What I can say is that a strong EU-Sápmi partnership is already in place, as noted in the interventions this morning and in this afternoon's session too. Now, to get specifically to the subject of today's session, it's climate justice and how to ensure a sustainable future for all. How can we turn the nice words in the EU's Arctic policy paper into concrete and effective action? I was very moved and very touched by the words from Mikael. I hope that we can avoid future pain, whatever comes, through an open dialogue and through compromise between us and policymakers on the national and the local level as well. Annie Sophia rightly identified that climate change is the biggest threat that we face, that the Arctic regions face, and clearly we believe strong action has to be taken to deal with that. I'm probably biased, as I partly wrote the thing, but I believe that the EU's Arctic policy is a bold attempt to confront the issue of climate change and how it affects Arctic regions and populations, not least the indigenous peoples. Gone are the descriptive passages of previous Arctic policy documents, and instead we set out concrete proposals which aim, among other things, to deal with the effects of climate change, to turn research into innovative solutions, to work with partner countries with an interest in what happens in Arctic regions to find common solutions, and to encourage the use of EU science and regional funding to create future-orientated jobs in sectors such as green energy. Indeed, we can point to many specific features in last year's updated policy paper which aim specifically to address the concerns previously raised by the Sami people. For example, we have committed to include indigenous knowledge from the beginning of the development of research programs under Horizon Europe. The Interreg programs, in particular the Northern Periphery and Arctic program, have already been well used by the Sami Council, not least in putting together the Sápmi EU paper. Certainly, the excellent initiative of the Sami Week should further raise awareness of your interests, together with the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue, which has now established itself as a regular feature in the EU's annual Arctic consultations. We have also made clear that we wish to involve Indigenous peoples, women and young people more in the future in decision-making processes concerning the Arctic. As we say in our policy, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is integral to the EU's human rights policies. We have pledged to promote the rights and freedoms of Indigenous peoples in line with ILO Convention 169 and encourage full consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples, bearing in mind the principle of free, prior and informed consent before adopting and implementing measures that may affect them. That said, I must, I think, at this point, manage expectations a little. The EU will, of course, push these principles hard with our member states and associated countries, as well as globally. But the reality remains that decisions such as planning or granting licenses to extract resources fall within the strict competence of national authorities. And that, of course, brings me on to one of the core aims of our policy, and also one of the most controversial. We are pushing for a double transition in Arctic regions, away from the exploitation and use of hydrocarbons and towards green technologies, including more European strategic autonomy in critical minerals. None of this was proposed lightly. We know that our call for a moratorium on further exploration for oil and gas is, to say the least, ambitious. But we also know that we would not be credible as the global leaders on climate action if we did not take a stand on this issue. And we also know that a sustainable future simply cannot contain a lot of hydrocarbons. Likewise, we realise that establishing a wind farm in the Arctic may seem like a splendid idea from the standpoint of officials like me sitting in their offices in Brussels, Copenhagen, Helsinki, Stockholm or Oslo, but it looks very different from the point of view of Sámi reindeer herders. And we also realise that our support for increased production of critical minerals is highly controversial. I must underline that before taking a firm position on this issue, we took serious account of a huge amount of input we received during our consultations, including from the Sámi Council and the Sámi parliaments. We strongly believe that the green transition must be a dual transition, firstly away from reliance on polluting hydrocarbons, and secondly towards modern green technologies for which we need specific mineral resources, many of which can be found in Arctic regions. Europe needs to make this transition, but it needs to do so without falling into the same trap we currently face with Russian gas supplies. We cannot be dependent on unstable or potentially hostile supplier countries for these minerals. This is where Europe's strategic autonomy is an important principle. I listened last week to a speech and panel discussion featuring the Prime Minister of Greenland. He laid out plainly the Greenlandic government's desire to encourage investment to help extract some of the mineral wealth beneath the ground. If the extraction of critical minerals does become an area of growth, we must, as the EU, ensure that it happens with the maximum acceptance of those who will be affected by it and according to the very strictest environmental and social standards. The EU is a lawmaker in 5 of the 8 Arctic states, and it will also work closely with like-minded partners to ensure the highest standards. Likewise, wealth generation in Arctic regions cannot just be siphoned out to the benefit of outside corporations. There must be sustainable and responsible investment in the future of our Arctic regions, and in particular in the way of life of those who live there. Over the 18 months we worked on developing our updated policy, we consulted widely and became acutely aware of the different and often contradictory interests at play. The choices we made were not easy and required compromise and balance, but also the realization that we cannot please all people all of the time. As we move forward in putting together an implementation plan for our proposals, what is most important is that we keep channels of communication open. You, the Sami people, are and will remain crucial interlocutors for us. We may not always agree, but I would like to think that on our side we have learnt from past mistakes and that we now understand each other better than at any other previous moment. Dialogue, of course, continues, and the learning process is not over. For us, the very most important thing is to help improve the lives of the people who live in Arctic regions, the idea of improving the livability in the Arctic regions. Our societies must be serious about ensuring ownership by local communities. We must balance the protection of long-established ways of working, of traditions and culture, with efforts to offer future economic prospects and a decent way of life to all people living in our northernmost regions. I and my colleagues look forward to working closely with the Sápmi to make these aims a reality. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael, for elaborating on the work that is currently done within the EU. It is indeed complex. You mentioned the word a double transition with contradictory interests. And thank you for underlining that it must be done through communication and also with respect for international human rights standards. So I would like to present our next speaker, Mr. Jesus Alquezar Sabadi, who is a socio-economic analyst at the General Directorate for the Environment on the European Commission. he deals mainly with issues related to energy, climate change, and their connections with the environment and its policies, such as the circular economy, pollution, and biodiversity. Mr. Alkesar Sabadi will present for us why the EU will gain on a climate justice approach. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to this Sami week and this event. I feel really very honored to be here for personal reasons that I'm not going to explain now. If you want after with a coffee, I can tell you that the lifestyle and the how the Sami people lives with nature and with nature and together with nature, so excuse my expression, had a big influence in my personal vision about how we have to live in nature and in an environment. And finally now, 40 years after I'm working in DG environment, probably there is an influence of this. So in my, I think I can move with this one. So I would like to, in my presentation, if it works, to remind that we are confronted with 4 major interrelated ecological crises. We were mentioning here that climate change is our major problem globally. I'm afraid that is not the only one. So climate change is, of course, one of the major threats of humanity now, but it is connected and with other problems that you know pretty well as biodiversity or pollution. And these problems are strictly interrelated. We cannot solve the climate crisis harming more the biodiversity crisis or the pollution crisis. And indeed, there is a common driver of all these 3 crises, which is natural resources depletion, and I think you mentioned some examples very clearly. As you know, the main priority of the von der Leyen Commission is, or was, until the aggression of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, the European Green Deal. And indeed, the European Green Deal wanted to give an answer, a systemic and coherent answer to this crisis that I mentioned. And for the first time ever, the environment becomes the first priority of the European Commission. Of course, we had legislation since the 1970s about all fields of environment, climate, pollution, plastics, everything, but it was never the top priority. So this is the European Green Deal that aimed at answering to these 4 interrelated global crises. And when I said that the European Green Deal pretends to be systemic and coherent, I meant that it's not only about climate, it's also about biodiversity, it's also about changing our food systems, making them more healthy and environmental. It's about the circular economy. It's about changing basically all our way of living, making it more sustainable in Europe. And there is 2 main principles in the European Green Deal. One is the do not harm principle to ensure this consistency. So for example, a renewable energy policy should not harm biodiversity. And there is another key principle, which is the leaving no one behind. And this is a matter of fairness. So we know that this transition that we are already implementing at European level, but also at global level, will leave winners and losers. This transition will never happen correctly if there is not a specific support to the losers. And this is the principle of leaving no one behind. Of course, these are very ambitious objectives. If we want to reach these objectives of the Green Deal, first we need money. There was a Green Deal investment plan, who wanted to mobilize 1 trillion euros. Mobilizing doesn't mean 1 trillion euros coming from the European Union. It's using the funding of the European Union to leverage other private and public investments. And what is more important within this investment plan is that there was there is a just transition mechanism, but as it was designed, it was more focused on regions more affected by the transition, thinking on coal regions depending on fossil fuels. And then this funding was even improved and enhanced thanks, sorry for the expression, to the COVID. You remember the difficult discussions between the member states to create the Recovery and Resilience Fund, or the Next Generation EU. So the Commission, since the publication of the Green Deal, has been extremely active. We have all sorts of action plans, strategies, and even legislation. Circular economy, biodiversity, from farm to fork, renovation wave, etc. And in particular, we have the climate law, which aims to reach climate neutrality by 2050 in the EU. And this led also to increase the ambition for 2030, so to reduce our GHG emissions by at least 55% by 2030. I wanted to stop in this slide because this is particularly important. What climate neutrality means? This means that we have to reduce the emissions in all sectors, really in all sectors, except in some areas where it is not possible to reduce emissions for physical or technological reasons. This is aviation, this is maritime transport, this is agriculture that is always going to emit. And these emissions, these remaining emissions, have to be somehow compensated or removed by either technologies, carbon capture technologies, or especially, and we know that this works already now, by natural carbon sinks, which is the part you see in green under the zero. And this is particularly important because we rely on forest for these natural carbon sinks. In countries like Finland, a very forested country, we had data from last week from the Statistical Institute showing that forests now are emitting CO2 instead of removing it. So we have a big problem in Europe in our climate policies with the management of the forest. We know also that our forests are in bad biodiversity condition, and the worst condition is in boreal forest. So this make us make questions about how we are managing the forest, and especially in Nordic countries. Yes, please.
It's not actually true that the forest has changed from a sink to releasing carbon. Is the whole land use sector?
Yes, it's the LULUCF sector. So sorry, but yes, I didn't want to enter into this sort of detail. So the LULUCF sector is land use change, and forestry. And it includes also agriculture, except non-CO2 agriculture, which is livestock. Of course, forests, even if they shrink, are always going to absorb CO2. But if we see the trend is negative, and we are seeing the same situation in other countries. We can enter into these details later if you wish. I would like to mention also what science is saying. If we look at the latest assessment report of the IPCC, so the Bible for climate, it raises the key role of indigenous people. First, as a source of knowledge and understanding on how we have to deal and to adapt to climate change, and how we have to manage this land. And at the same time, it shows how indigenous people in the planet are particularly affected by climate change, and but also by climate policies, as you rightly mentioned before. So we are confronted with a loss of ecosystems, a major impact on lifestyles, on the food diets, and also arriving to the extremes in many places of the planet, I'm afraid. We have human rights violations linked with deforestation, or even violence against indigenous environmental defenders. And one of the conclusions of the IPCC is that there is an absolute necessity to integrate these indigenous people and their knowledge in policy and decision making. The problem is that these ideas that are not new, so really since the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, they raise more or less the same issues and the same recommendations. These policies are rarely integrated in our climate policies. So I was checking before, when I was preparing this presentation, different impact assessments, etc., of our policies, and really we don't find many mentions to indigenous people. And even there are very few mentions to impacts on human rights. This is due, or this is at least my hypothesis, that climate policies are heavily based on modeling, on statistical modeling. And of course, this is very macro. These models cannot enter into the detail of specific areas, specific knowledge, specific practices. And then another reason is that until very recently, I would say that until the publication of the Green Deal, these climate policies were focused on energy. Energy represents 75% of the emissions, and there was no real integration between biodiversity aspects and climate aspects. And this explains many of the problems that we have now in our policies. And this is also why the European Green Deal insists on this consistency between policies. I found a mention of the knowledge of indigenous people in the Climate Adaptation Strategy Impact Assessment. As you know, this climate adaptation strategy is very focused on local actions, and of course, indigenous knowledge is mentioned once in the impact assessment, 100 pages. But it was the only mention I found. And this happens when we are aware about dramatic cases of negative impacts of our policies, as it is the case of biofuels, the case of palm oil in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, or the consequences of forest-intensive exploitation, for example, plantations replacing old-growth forests. This is something that the Commission is well aware about this. I'm not going to enter into detail in the Arctic strategy because you did it already. But I would like to underline that there, yes, we have a clear, is the part you have in green here, a clear mention on the role of local people, and in particular the Sami people. I have here some of the concrete commitments and actions of the Arctic strategy, sources of funding. My question mark to you would be, in practice, how is this funding used, and do you really see benefits on this? And I would like to also to raise attention, if I manage to move to the next one, to some risk of the Arctic strategy. First one is renewable energy. So I think that everybody agrees that we have to further develop renewable energy, but we have to be very prudent about the impact of these renewable energy sources. And you mentioned again a very clear example, but we are seeing similar examples in other places of Europe and even in third countries. The case of biofuels that I mentioned is a clear one, but we are seeing now in southern European countries demonstrations which slogan is yes to renewables, but not like this. So you see that the situation is widespread. And then you mentioned also the extraction of raw materials can also have a very negative impact. I'm afraid that the current context with the war in Ukraine and even the proposals under the Repower EU package published 2-3 weeks ago is not the best one, because we are focusing even more about ensuring security of supply. This means more renewables, and more renewables even with a legal proposal that the Commission presented that establishes that in certain circumstances renewables are considered of overriding public interest. Overriding public interest means also less consultations and can have also some negative impacts. But this is a proposal of the Commission. The discussion is, this is, let's say, the beginning of the discussion, because this has to be negotiated with the Parliament and with the Council. But now we are seeing in EU policies that we are moving a little bit from focusing on environmental problems, the Green Deal, to security of supply. And these are not good news, either for environment and either to consider the local interest of, in this case, indigenous people, but also other communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the very comprehensive presentation and analysis of the Green Deal and the current work done within the Commission. So we have 5 minutes until we have a snack break, 20-minute snack break. And I would like to open up the floor for questions, but I would first like to ask a question for all of you. Mr. Alcazar Sabadi mentioned that indigenous peoples and indigenous knowledge is rarely integrated in EU climate policies. And we also heard many needs concerned and from my Sami colleagues. So I would like to ask all of you, what would each of you think should be the first steps towards a better future or towards a just transition? And what steps must be taken to integrate Sami into this decision making?
Well, I can start. Actually, when I was hearing your presentation, it came to my mind this one thing I've been thinking lately is that when we look at these new climate strategies, climate actions, we are seeing the words of indigenous peoples. We are seeing in the strategies, they are the exact words that indigenous peoples have been saying for decades. And what is the issue? That indigenous peoples are named once in the 101 pages, but the words are ours. So I don't know if this answers strictly to your question, but I see that we actually need, it's good that we have our words there, that people have realized what we've been saying, but how we can get us being part of it and having us quoted, named that this is indigenous knowledge, because it is when it's written there. As I said in my speech, to have the youth be in the European Parliament, which is point of this week also, to get the youth there, to get the information that we haven't shared, because we have a lot more to share. Having our names there would be the first step. Thank you.
I'll just follow up very briefly. I think, I think this is the first step towards trying to assure climate justice. I mean, there is events like this, and the fact that we have the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue, the Indigenous and the Sami voice is now heard in Brussels. And I can only encourage you to stay tough and stay strong and stay outspoken. And we have some structures which allow you to express yourselves. And I think this is a good step in the right direction. There's many different interests that we have to balance, obviously, and by being reticent and holding back, you won't get what you want. So, in my last 2 years of working with the Sami Council, I've noticed, and with the Sami parliaments, that you do speak your mind, and I would just encourage you to do so, because as Heza said, the name check for you may not be in the paper, but at least the arguments that you're putting forward are starting to find their way into our documents and into our thinking. And I look back to the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue last year, where the director from our Research and Innovation Department pledged that Indigenous knowledge would be built into research programs under Horizon Europe from a very early stage. So I think the message is getting through, and I would just encourage you to keep banging the drum.
I must tell something about the climate changes. We, the Sami people, we are like water. We are experts of adapting ourselves, and that is our biggest strength, and it is our biggest weakness. If you put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. And all people, they are so used to us that we can always adapt ourselves. We don't know that we are doing it, because we do it to survive. And in my opinion, the decision makers, they are like a goose. And when we talk about our issues, tell about our problems, it is like pouring water on a goose. And you know what happens then? Nothing.
So difficult to react after your intervention. I'm afraid that I rather agree with you. So in the unit where I work, we deal also with deforestation. So this is an issue that affects more third countries. And we are in contact with other indigenous people from other places, from Indonesia, from Brazil, who come to Brussels, is even farther away than the Northern Europe. And very often in the discussions we have with them, which are very similar, by the way, of the ones we have here, they tell us there are directorates general, for example, energy, who doesn't receive us. They are very busy. And sometimes it's really difficult to be in this situation when you think that I'm receiving these people, but it should not be me who are at the end a small administrator at the commission, but someone of a higher level, a commissioner, or at least someone from a cabinet. Because, okay, I can report on what we were listening, but our role is very, very limited. And yes, I'm afraid that I have this feeling that there are channels for communication, but if these channels are not really institutionalized, the voice doesn't arrive to the real decision makers. So what we can transmit at our level remains there without any big impact. On the other hand, I appreciate what you said, Anne-Sophie, because when I criticize that indigenous people are not mentioned, but you say, yes, but what we are claiming is there, it shows that, okay, the voice arrives. So this makes me be more optimistic than I was before coming to this event.
If I could just follow up a little bit. I mean, also the EU is one level, and we are major players in this, but you also have to bang the drum at national level too, because certain competences lie with the EU and certain competences lie with the national authorities. And at the end of the day, the laws of the European Union are made by the member states of the European Union and the members of the European Parliament. So you need to bang on doors, not only in Brussels, but elsewhere too.
So thank you so much to all our presenters. We are a bit over time, and I think we all need a break. We've had issues with the air conditioning, but I believe it is fixed now. So we will not have time for questions and the Q&A right now. So we will have a short break and reconvene at 3:20 when we will continue with the panel discussion. So thank you all for coming, and let's go out and have some air. And oh, yeah, of course. Of course, I would also like to thank our presenters with gifts from the Doyer Per Stefan Idivoma. So thank you so much. To the next part of this session, the panel discussion, which will be moderated by my colleague, Gun-Britt Retter. Gun-Britt is the head of the Arctic Environmental Unit at the Sami Council and has worked with Arctic issues since 2001 and is also the newly appointed Arctic representative in the local communities and indigenous peoples platforms facilitative working group under the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Long name. So, yes, Gun-Britt, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Gito, Susanna, for that introduction. And as you heard in her introduction earlier, she has been my trainee in the Arctic and Environmental Unit during this EU-Sámi project. And it's been a great pleasure for me to be your mentor, Susanna. So thank you for that. As we heard in the first part of the session, calls for just and fair transition describes both where we are going and how to get there. The IPCC have in their latest reporting cycle underlined the importance of solving issues of colonialism, resulting in lack of upheld rights, simultaneously with the new research, governance, policy and collaboration to increase the possibility of community-led adaptation to climate change. At the same time, IPCC reports that current unsustainable development patterns are increasing exposures of ecosystems and people to climate hazards. While some adaptation strategies might be beneficial in the short term, they might also risk resulting in long-term maladaptive outcomes, especially for indigenous peoples. So, for a just transition, what do we need and how do we get there is what I hope this panel can plunder about. Let me first introduce all the panelists, and whereafter I am seeking to have a conversation with the panelists based on some questions. And also, this time, I hope we also have time to questions from the floor. So I encourage the panelists to try to keep to short answers. So let me introduce, and starting with a long intervention myself. Erik, let me introduce the panelists. Here closest to me, we have Erik Bergqvist, a Swedish member of the European Parliament, the Progressive Alliance and Socialists and Democrats, it says here. He's also one of the hosts for this event. Erik Bergqvist is from Umeå in Sweden, is a member of the European Parliament for the Swedish Social Democrats since 2019. Bergqvist has a PhD in economics from Umeå University and has gathered several decades of experience of regional politics in Västerbotten and the Arctic region. Erik is currently member of the Committee on Transport and Tourism and the Committee on Regional Development and substitute of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. Erik is also a member of the Delegation for Northern Cooperation. Erik Bergqvist is the only member of European Parliament from the northern Sweden and is strongly committed to raising issues regarding the unique conditions and particular sets of regional development challenges connected to the northern parts of Europe. Erik is vice chair for the Arctic in the SEA Arctica Intergroup, gathering more than 100 members of the European Parliament from coastal areas in Europe. Next to him is Åsa Larsson Blind, who you already met this morning. Don't need maybe further. Oh, no, she wasn't introduced. That's right. Åsa Larsson Blind is the vice president of the Sami Council and the project manager of the Interreg project Filling the EU-Sámi Knowledge Gaps. She has been a member of the Sami Council since 2008 and elected president in the period 2017 to 2019. She was, as first female elected chair of the National Sami Association in Sweden in 2019 to 2021, where she also was a board member in 2007 to 2011. Åsa lives in Övre Soppero in the Swedish part of Sápmi, is part of a reindeer herding family and holds a Master in Science in Human Resources Management and Development. Michael, you already heard in the previous session or before the coffee break, so I jump him and go to Erik Larsen, who is, or Lassivar Erik Larsen. He's from Scanit. He's a political advisor to the Sami parliament in Norway. He's from Scanit in the Norwegian side of Sápmi, where he grew up with small-scale farming. He is a member of the Sami parliament in Norway, but is currently on leave after he has appointed as political advisor for the governing council of the parliament. And you actually heard from him this morning. Larsen is also a lawyer and has worked with advocating indigenous people's rights in the Norwegian government, and has also had earlier a career in the Sami council. So that is our excellent panelists, and you have both pictures and you can see them here. So then we can go to the questions. And as I said, I hope we can conduct this as more of a dialogue. And you all get the first question, and I ask you to elaborate on that in turn. So I start with Erik here, closest to me. What are the key elements for a just transition for the EU and Sápmi, in your opinion?
I would say the first and most important, and it has been said so often that it risks losing its importance, and I would say it's dialogue with the local and regional, with the people living there, with the indigenous people and other people living in the Arctic. I think that's the most important thing. And because sometimes I feel like we are having a dialogue infarct. There are so many people wanting to have dialogues, and I have talked when I was a regional council in my region. I talked to many representatives from Sami villages and say that there are so many who wants to have a communication with us, a dialogue with us, anchor things that we don't have the time. And we don't have the resources either. So I think we have to find a structured way to have these dialogues. And of course, regarding on the question, who are we supposed to talk to? Who has the mandate, and what is the issue? But I would say dialogue with the people it concerns, I would say, is the most important thing. And to find these forms, of course.
Thank you, and also pointing to the challenge that was pointed to earlier also this morning, that the resources of engaging in so many different processes and dialogues. Yeah, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, because, and that's also something I experienced when we were doing a lot of EU projects together with organizations in Västerbotten, where I have my most experience, or I would say northern Sweden. We have the large city of Umeå, and we have the small city of Bjurholm or Sorsele, and even smaller organizations. And they say, we would like to do this EU project, but we don't even have the resources to make an announcement to apply for it. So I think it's a matter of, in this matter and in those matters, how do we grant the capacity to be part of this dialogue if it is so important? Because as I heard, Reindeer said, well, of course, I would like to participate in the dialogue, but okay, I have other things to do. I have to make a living as well. So we have to find the important dialogues, who to talk to, and also to build this capacity. And I think that has to build together, but also, of course, the ones wanting to have the dialogue, which could be the regional political level, national political level, others, which usually have more resources. Okay, how do we participate to give this dialogue capacity?
Thank you for that elaboration. And also, what do you think are the key elements for the just transition for the EU and Sápmi?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the introductions. I would say that one of the key elements, I would say, for any transition, but now talking about the European Arctic and Sápmi, would be the recognition of the different parties in the dialogues, as Erik talked about. But so I think that we also, the recognition has to be there so the dialogue is put on the right level. And we are talking about the appropriate things at the appropriate levels, because what we see is dialogue can also be information flow, and that might be also draining capacity. So I would say that key elements is would be the recognition of the indigenous peoples in the Arctic, and in this case the Sami, as an equal party and an equal partner in these dialogues, in designing where we are transitioning to. Because we also need to talk about the key elements of, okay, what are the goal of the transition? Because it's not the transformation itself that are the goal here. The goal should be a transition to a sustainable society. So the key elements, I would say, is identifying and recognizing the parties and the partners in designing the transition, and also talking about what is it actually we are aiming at, what's the goal? Because we can transform a lot of things, but it won't be greener or more sustainable if that's not the aim of the actions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you also for pointing that the goal is also kind of setting the design to what Erik was pointing to. So, Michael, you already spoke earlier in this session, but do you have more elements to add to for a just transition?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that we all share the same goal, basically of trying to reduce environmental degradation, try and mitigate the effects of climate change, and try and ensure sustainability. Obviously, there's many different definitions of sustainability, but I think we all know roughly what we mean. The second thing is that, of course, most of the energy transition and the fight against climate change isn't going to happen in the Arctic regions. It has to happen south of the Arctic regions, because that's where all the problem comes from in the first place. So I think that's the first thing to remember. We need to act internationally. As policymakers, we need to be conscious of unintended effects of apparently good measures. So, you know, we are, thanks to your efforts, we are aware of the potential negative effects and the real negative effects of things that may seem like a good idea from our perspective. So thank you for that. That requires, of course, a continuing dialogue with you, with the Sami people. In our paper, we recognize ILO Convention 169 and the concept of free, prior and informed consent. We now have to really, you know, lobby for it and push for it internationally, but also with our member states, because as I said in my speech, we don't have the power to apply it, so we need to really work hard on pushing that. We do have, obviously, legislative powers in 5 of the 8 Arctic countries, and the other 2 of the other 3 tend to be in the same line as us as well, so we have things that we can really do from the legal perspective as well. But again, of course, that requires input from all sides and taking account of input from all sides and finding acceptable compromises. And the final point, this is a quote that I heard from a very admirable academic in a panel I did recently, and she said, good governance is not only about policy outcomes, it's also about inclusive processes. So, you know, again, I think, without wishing to repeat myself, it's all about involving the people who will be affected to the max. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michael, again for reminding of the importance of inclusiveness, but also that the transition needs to happen internationally and at global level, and not exactly only in Arctic, and being aware of that it can have negative impacts. So you also mentioned ILO and rights and so on, and that might make a good transfer to, or transition to Eirik for the same question. What do you think are the key elements for a just transition?
Well, Lugito, and thank you for the presentation, and good afternoon to you all. A key element, in my opinion, is, speaking as a lawyer as well, the rights of the indigenous people. And I always have the same starting point speaking about indigenous people's rights, and that's the right to self-determination. So it's important with dialogue, but we need something more. We have to respect the right to a free, prior, and informed consent, which sometimes means no. And so we are speaking about influence in decision-making processes. I also want to mention benefit sharing. If industry is allowed in our territories, which could be a burden, we as indigenous peoples should take part in the benefits economically and in other ways. I also wanted to comment on climate change itself. Climate change itself is a threat for Sami culture, but also the government's mitigation measures to reduce the climate effect is threatening us, not only the climate change itself. We can say, globally speaking, that indigenous people have not caused the greenhouse gas emissions. And then we know that indigenous people are among the groups that is the most affected of climate change. So we experience a double burden. Indigenous people have little responsibility for the problems, are the most affected, and in addition, we are expected to give away our land, water, and resources. So the green shift cannot be an extraction of resources in indigenous people's territories. Such an approach will be considered from our side as green colonization. And I speak about mining, energy production, forestry, and so on. As the former president of the Sami Parliament in Norway said, land grabbing in name of the climate is unjust. Land grabbing in the name of the climate is unjust. And I also wanted to follow up what Åsa said and comment on economic growth and development. In Sami culture, it's not necessary about growth. We have our own term called birgen. It means to get by, and it is related to indigenous philosophy that exists among many other indigenous peoples, that we are a caretaker of our resources and earth, and has to leave the resources in good condition to our descendants. So economic growth is not always compatible with indigenous thinking. And so why is development and growth the solution of the challenges we face? We have grown into these problems. How can we believe that we can grow out of it? So that's my first remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eirik, for phrasing that so eloquently at the end, that we have grown into this, and how can we even believe that we can grow out of it? But I want to continue with you, Eirik. Do you see any examples of unsustainable development patterns or even maladaptive efforts being manifested in Sápmi, hindering a transition towards being just?
Yes, we have some examples also recently, and Mikael Koopmanen mentioned one of them in Gallok, Swedish side, and we experienced that it is a pressure on our land and waters, and it's regarding mining industry, because mining is important for the green shift. We are told about copper is necessary for battery and so on. And the most famous case is the Nussir project in Repparfjord in the Norwegian side. And the state has, the government of Norway has approved to dump mining waste, toxic mining waste, directly into the fjord. And this cannot be sustainable. This fjord is a national salmon fjord and is important for Sami fisheries, and the reindeer herding district is also affected. Another case which has been had a lot of attention in international media is the Fosen case. It's a wind power plant in the southern Sami area of Norway, in the Norwegian side. And it's one of the largest projects in northern Europe, and it's 151 wind turbines, and the roads that are built is 132 kilometers. And I've been there twice, and I must say, if we had such a good standard on the roads in my community, you would be really happy. This is impacting the reindeer herding a lot. Not only the wind turbines, but also the roads and the infrastructure which is needed. And the wind project was allowed built, and but the case still went to court and reached the Supreme Court of Norway in last year, and they made a decision in October in the Supreme Court's Grand Chamber, and with an unanimous judgment they concluded that the windmill project was violating the rights of the indigenous peoples regarding to Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, Article 27. And this is not just justice, because even if they won in the Supreme Court, the windmills, the wind turbines, they are still there. So the system is not good enough if we allow to build major wind industry projects before even before the court decision is made. And I also wanted to mention then that the companies, they cannot trust the states to comply with the human rights. They have a responsibility in their own. And I believe that the European Union has a role to play here regarding fundings and corporate responsibility. Because if we fail in climate justice, we will all lose. Indigenous peoples, corporations will lose, and also the states. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and allowing quite a long answer there. Michael, why are you interrupting?
I just wanted to, you said you wanted to have a dialogue, so I thought I'd jump in.
Yeah.
Just very briefly, I mean, I was checking this a little bit earlier today, and my colleague pointed out to me that there's a recent proposal for a directive on EU corporate sustainability on due diligence, and that actually references directly the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, and so implicitly that I think would require companies to respect the principle of free, prior and informed consent. I mean, obviously this is a draft directive, it hasn't been agreed yet, but I mean, I think the the knock-on effect on our legal process is being felt perhaps from some of these judgments. I mean, it's not a done deal, but it's an interesting development, I think.
Super. Thank you, Michael. Did you make note of that to put it on the EU unit portfolio?
Thank you for that. We have actually contributed to that consultation, so yeah, we're curious to see the result. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. So, and thank you, Michael, for informing on that. And Åsa, I was actually going to pose the same question to you before I get back to Erik. Do you see any examples of unsustainable development patterns? We already heard 3 examples, and we heard from Mikael Kummonen also in the previous one. But an additional question, what impacts do you think these have on Sami society?
Yes, thank you. And we've heard Erik and also before the break many examples of also, I guess, on the effects of what Erik also said, others' climate action and the mitigation actions, and the effects that Sápmi and the Sami society need to cope with. So it's the double burden, as Erik put so well put. And I would say that these examples, we have a lot of them, is examples of the path of what I would say an unsustainable transition of as of now, since we see that there are actions in the name of transition and in the name of sustainability. But as also Michael was commenting earlier, yes, we have the same goal, but maybe in the same wording, but what is the meaning of sustainability? And there I would say comes the notion of the justice in this, that it also need to be sustainable for the Sami community and for the Sami society. So we also need to talk about what's the foundation, what is it that we are sustaining, and on what grounds. So I think that maybe the pathway of the green transition actually needs a transition, because I think that we don't only need to talk about the switching of energy sources. Of course, we need the renewables, but we also need to talk about how do we use the resources and resource efficiency. So not only switching from one resource to another, but also in that transition, talk about what kind of society are we transforming into, and should we use this much resources, or should we also try to make it more efficient as we transition? So I think we need to kind of go back a step, not only talking about actions and resource use, also talking about economical structures and resource efficiency when we talk about transitioning. So I think that these so I don't think that I will talk about more examples of them. I think that also the effects on Sápmi was very well put in before the break. So I think you got the picture. Yeah.
So thank you. So what Åsa is here encouraging is everybody to use is goksi rather than plastic cups, to put it short. Bergqvist, what measures should be undertaken from the EU to ensure a just transition? Or what could you, as a member of the European Parliament, do to work towards this just transition in the European Arctic and thus also in Sápmi?
When I was a child in the 60s and 70s, I haven't looked actually, but as I remember, we had always white winters with lots of snow. In January it was 3-4 weeks we had minus 20, 25, sometimes 30. It was very predictable, and I love these winters. We never had spikes really under our shoes because it wasn't icy, it was snow slippery, but snow slippery and ice slippery are two very different things. And I don't think it's fair that the young ones today perhaps will never have this kind of winters. That's not justice as I see it. But I also see, and this is in the small, but we also have in the bigger picture where you ask what are not going in a sustainable direction, and I think there are three things, but we shouldn't elaborate on all of them. One is, and I wouldn't just say it climate, I would say the environment, where we have both the climate issue, and the issue of biodiversity. Of course, it feels stupid to call them issues. They're much bigger than so. The other one, which is connected, it's democracy. I don't feel that democracy is developing in the right direction. We are seeing less and less democracies, and I would say we are seeing more and more non-democratic parties in democratic countries. And the third is, of course, the ultimate disaster that is happening now in Europe with Russia's aggression on Ukraine. And these are in a way connected because it all has to do how do we treat each other, how do we treat the really important issues like the environment we are living in. And that's the big picture. And we are up in the north, well, we're not here now, but when we are back home, we are experience the climate change much harsher and much earlier than anyone else. And we have to mitigate that. But we will not be the ones hitting the hardest, because around the equator, people will actually not be able to live any longer. And these are the most densely populated areas in the world. So we will, the numbers of migration we see now will be small, really small compared to what we are facing if we can't fix the climate. And these people will come north. They will come up to us. And then we will have completely different issues to figure out. And that's what and if we are to be able to fix the environment, both the climate and we need people to say this is okay. And there we comes back to the justice thing. And justice mostly is we are very good at comparing towards other people. If everyone gets a rise, it's okay. If everyone gets a rise and someone gets a little more, it's not okay. It's about justice and comparing. And that's when we do these really necessary things now for the climate, and some will be really tough. I think most of us would say it's okay as long as we all experience that it's just. And it is not just now. I can see it in the northern part. I can see it for indigenous people, and I can see it in a lot of other people. For example, they need a car, and they don't have an alternative when fuel prices are going up. They don't hate the environment or are less climate friendly than others, but they feel it's not just what is happening. And if we are to act in democracies, we need people to be part of a positive climate change. And then this question is so necessary that it feels just. So we have to find these solutions. And then we're back to where we started. We need to find the best way, the right way for the right questions to have the dialogue about, and also to find the representatives. And an example, when we have for the current rights, then the next step is to see what are the rights we think we should have. And here I think, sorry I'm getting long, I think EU has a really important role, because all these dialogue, they have to be in a way formalized, at least the important dialogues. And we can't have one kind of dialogue in Norway with the Norway Sámi parliament, and another type of dialogue in Sweden, and a third in Finland. That will be exhausting and chaotic. So I think here EU has a really important role to help these countries find a really good way to have this structured dialogue where we can take these really important steps to a just climate transition. Sorry, I was long there.
No worries. Thank you, Erik, and also emphasizing what you said in the first answer, that to find the right structure to have these dialogues, and that governance and democracy is a key to that, and also bringing in the global challenge of the justice, because we might also face climate refugees coming and changing the whole picture. Michael, you have been waiting long now, so do you have anything to add to what Erik here was saying, and maybe also reflect some on how you are progressing with actually implementing the new strategy, and how can the European External Action Service contribute towards just transition?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to react a little bit to what's been said before. I mean, Erik, one of the Eric Larsson, makes the point that we grew into it, we can't grow out of it. I mean, I think our terminology is actually rather careful. We talk about, sustainable development, and we are not advocating sort of turning over the Arctic into a sort of industrial, heartland or whatever. It's a question of trying to make a reasonable shift where we can actually create future-orientated jobs in sort of green industries. And so I think we choose our terminology extremely carefully. We're not aiming necessarily for massive growth. It's a question of transforming the way we produce energy, and perhaps some of the technologies that we develop in Arctic regions through our research and through our financing can actually be exported elsewhere. It could be perhaps an area where we develop future technologies, but of course in a very limited and in a very careful way that takes accounts of exactly the sort of stories that Eric was telling about the damage that's been done to traditional lands and traditional ways of life. So I think the terminology is very important. Sustainable development, I mean, if you look at the program of the Russian chairmanship of the Arctic Council, they talk about sustainable development. They mean something entirely different from what we mean. They mean developing in a sustainable way for the Russian economy, as far as I can work out. Whereas I think we around this table probably generally agree what we mean by sustainable development. If you look at, to get onto Åsa's point, if you look at the Repower EU set of proposals that Jesus mentioned earlier, energy efficiency is actually one of the keys to that. We know we can't solve everything by replacing 100% old energy technologies by new ones. There has to be an element of energy efficiency there as well. So I think we're aware of this issue and not simply wanting to recreate the same problems in a different way. On Eric Beckfist's point, dialogue obviously is important, and we don't want dialogue to be unfocused and chaotic. But again, it's one of the points that's brought out in your excellent Sápmi paper, actually, how we can establish, we can help capacity building and how we can develop a dialogue. But I think it would be premature for me today to say how we should do that. We have already the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue, which I think is a very good annual event. We have open doors and we have open telephone lines, so we're open to your thoughts at any stage. Huh? Our telephones are in our pockets, unfortunately, so you can always call us. But we will have to look at how we can help with this capacity building and how we can set up. We have a structure already. And I'm not sure, some of my colleagues around them will shoot me if I say too much here, but I mean, we need to make sure that this works efficiently without building too many cumbersome structures. I think that would be an important point. What else was I going to say? Implementing the strategy. I mean, we made it for the first time ever in an EU Arctic paper. We actually set out a list of what we always call in Brussels deliverables, things that we definitely concretely want to achieve, which is partly making yourself a hostage to fortune, because when we did it, of course, there immediately was an energy crisis. So we're saying, please stop drilling for oil and gas. Oh, by the way, we need more gas. So clearly it's a difficult situation. But we are serious about this. It may be a longer term aim than it was before, but we wouldn't be credible if we weren't serious about this. So we have now, with our colleagues throughout the different commission departments, we've got a kind of a grid of actions that have to be done, because it's all very well to write things in a policy paper. It's quite another thing to actually do them. But I mean, the work is starting. We were hoping to get some council conclusions on our Arctic policy document back in April, but of course the situation changed enormously because of what happened in Ukraine. But maybe that process can be restarted, and then we get sort of guidance from our political leaders. In the meantime, obviously, what happened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed the scenery considerably in the Arctic, and there are new things we need to consider, but we still think that our policy document has all the relevant elements for us to do our work, and it's a living document. We don't say what we said in October 2021 is it. If things change, we change with it. So I think we're kicking off the process. I mean, nothing has happened overnight, but for example, we will be opening our office in Nuuk, for example, in a couple of months' time. So things are moving. That was rather a long and varied answer. Apologies for that.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I will, looks like Åsa wants to say something, and Eirik, and I will invite you to give brief responses. And while you give the response, I encourage people to start thinking of questions. Terkel already have one, we have to wait a little bit. But think of questions while Åsa and Eirik gives short comments to the dialogue.
Yeah, I will try to keep it short. But to respond or to react a bit of what has been said, I think that we've heard during the day many times raised the need for capacity and also the need to include indigenous peoples and some people. But we should also, in talking about the keys to a truly green transition, we should also switch it around and say that we are also one of the key measures to finding the solutions for a green transition. And as Michael pointed out, we need a reasonable shift, but we do need a shift. And I think that it's time that we actually talk about that we actually do need a change. We need to consider it's not if we have to change and transform our society, it's about how and where do we find the good solutions. And one of that we also heard earlier in the panel is that what has been shown is that the biodiversity is decreasing less rapidly in areas of indigenous peoples around the world. So and we all know that the biodiversity crisis is one of the major climate crises, that part of the climate crisis. So when we are looking at what's the reasonable shift and what is it that we actually need to do, we need to evaluate what is the best measures to take. And actually looking at those measures of biodiversity, we could say that, well, supporting indigenous peoples' traditional land use, our traditional livelihoods, would actually be a climate action that would actually then contribute to the green transition, since we are clearly doing something right when we are securing biodiversity and we see that it's so rapidly decreasing in other parts of the world. So I think that evaluating what we actually need to do and seeing that indigenous peoples we are one of the key to actually finding the solutions, and including us would actually mean us being able to be part of the solutions and bringing our solutions to the table. So I think that it's a win-win. Thank you.
Thank you, Åsa. It's hard to get eye contact to try to get you to wrap up. And Eirik.
Thank you, Åsa, for mentioning the biodiversity crisis, because it's actually two crises, and that the indigenous people has a lot to contribute with dealing with these crises. And I just wanted to react on some of the points which was made here, and I believe that the Sami society is organized in a good way. It's well organized. When industry projects are planned, we know who the right holders are. The property, because they have the property rights, and they are the ones who carry the right to the free and prior and informed consent. Regarding the Sami parliaments, we are, and as well the Sami Council, we are supporting the Sami right holders, and we have to make sure that the legal framework is good enough to respect the right holders, the Sami right holders. So I believe the industry and others, they know who to contact and how the Samis are organized. And I also want to make some point on the energy, the need for energy. In the northern part, at least in the Norwegian side, we have more than enough energy, and we have given up much of our land to wind industry and hydropower electricity. And another point is that we have a lot of vacancies. It is in the Norwegian side, the Sami areas, it's 3,000 at the moment. It used to be 4,000 a couple of months ago. So we don't need new jobs. We actually need more people. So for us, we need to what's the benefit for us to be in the green shift and to contribute even more than we have already done? Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. And Erik also asked for a brief comment before. I have 3 questions from the floor that I will allow after Erik's comment.
Yeah, I forgot to answer one of the questions. What do I actually do in the parliament? And in that sense, it's quite simple for me because almost everything I do is from a northern perspective. I live in the north. I am, as you, I didn't realize it was that much, but where I was active, everything has an Arctic perspective. That's what I'm doing. But I would say one of the most important things that is often forgotten when you are a politician or working like that, you have to have your experts. And I would say I have experts who know very much about the Nordic, the Arctic, and the topics I am trying to change.
Thank you for adding that. And then I have 3 questions from the floor. I think that's what we have time for. I will allow for them and then give to all the 4 panelists to respond in 1 minute afterwards. So the first was up there, Terkel.
Thank you, and thank you for the panelists and to Gunbrit for moderating this. I have a couple of observations, then I wanted to ask you about 2 specific issues. One of the things that strikes me with this event is that it didn't happen in the 1990s. You came into the Arctic Council, that was a breakthrough, and you have built capacity. You have somebody who is a legal scholar, you have political scientists, you have people who can draft. That has changed dramatically compared to the origins of Sami blood, if you remember that film. So one of the soft things that we are contributing with the EU, making you into a visible interlocutor, is giving you standing. And I think we are strengthening your spine. But that does not necessarily lead to full satisfaction. We cannot step in and take over the licensing process nationally, and we cannot make the Høyesterett in Norge decide and then pull down these wind turbines. But you are now able to arrange a week with the help of some MEPs and the Commission funding through Interreg that brings you much more satisfaction than you had at the origin of the Sami blood film. I think that's an important point. The second point I wanted to just make is that somehow it is not helpful if we are bringing you into one position and the Western societies into another position. Because in fact, you are a voice of us. We just don't always know how to handle it. And in the big picture, if we don't manage to have a successful dialogue between the EU institutions, the member states of the EU, the national states in the European Union, and the Sami, then how is it going to be helpful for those who live in Amazonas, in Papua New Guinea, and other places? So I think what we are collectively trying to achieve is a fair and inclusive process, but it's not sure that it will give you full satisfaction immediately. I could make a number of other points, but I do want to ask you about 2 specific points. How do you feel about taking ownership, financial ownership? I think Erik Bergqvist, we have now and then talked to LKAB, and I have aired the thought that they should finance, together with you, a fund where you take ownership. This is, of course, bringing you into a capitalist financial world, which may not be very happy. But if you look at the way that the legal transition took place in Alaska when they found oil at the North Slope, they created these regional corporations. Anyway, in the power world of as it is today, if you own pension funds, if you own land, if you own resources, you're in a different position. And then so I wanted to ask you about how do you feel about getting into real ownership in the big scale? The second question I wanted to raise with you is, how do you see cryptocurrencies affecting climate justice? I mean, as a citizen, I'm Danish, as many of you will know. I'm just seeing cryptocurrencies sucking up energy resources in a way which 10 years ago I would never have believed it possible. I think the whole energy consumption of a state like Uruguay goes into producing bitcoins. Where did that come from? It's not EU regulated that you have cryptocurrencies. It's nothing to do with wind turbines in northern Norway, and it has nothing to do with the points that Michael Koolman made earlier. But it has tremendous implications. So how do you see the perverse impacts of some of these dynamics, for instance, cryptocurrencies?
Thank you for those questions and reflections, and I have two other from the floor before I give the opportunity to respond. So, and now I have a brain freeze of these names, but over there first.
Kiitos Gunn-Britt. My name is Elrauna Näkkälijärvi, and I am a youth board member of the Sami Association of Norway. Throughout the day, we have heard a lot about cooperations and dialogues between EU and the Sami people. We have heard you wanting to improve the lives of the indigenous Sami people in the Arctic regions. We have been hearing you say that you want to include youth and women in decision makings, and also to remember the views of Sami people. You also said that there are many different interests to balance. But then why are our lands and our waters the ones that have to, move away for those interests? So basically, there are a lot of big words regarding our future. So my question really is, when you leave today and when you go to work tomorrow and when you go to Parliament, what will you do to lift up our Sami rights, human rights? What will you do?
Thank you, Elrauna, for that question. And then the last question is over there, and you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lars Bjørnar Knudsen. I'm the chair of NORE, which is the Sami youth organization in Norway. We have heard a lot of big and fancy words, and yeah, I'm not used to it at all. But what I haven't heard anything about, I would say, is the when. Because the only thing I can find is like 2028. And this is mainly about the climate. And with the Paris Agreement, we are committed to reduce our with up to it's from 50% by 2030. If we don't have stuff in place way before that time, I believe we would have too many windmills and too many destroyed areas in Sápmi. And it would be too late for what EU can do if nothing is done before that time. Because then we are almost at the finish line. So what is step 2, 3, and 4? And when do we see them in action? Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Now I want to give a freedom to these 4 panelists on who want to go first. Erik.
Erik or Eric. Too many Eric around. No, I put down the questions so I wouldn't forget any one of them. And the first one, yes, I think and that, I would say, one problem with the whole of the North. I would say the North is very rich, but the people living in the North is not very rich. And if you own something, you actually control it very much, and you can decide whether to keep it as it is or to develop that. So I would say my general answer to that is yes, we should try to own much more up in the North. And I also think, and this is my very personal opinion, that the national level should participate more to give these possibility to, should we call it, locally and regionally controlled investment capital, so that we can do this investment in ownership. Cryptocurrencies is well, I don't really, well, everything has some kind of use, but I don't really see the use of that. I see they spend a lot of energy. But to complicate things, other things spend a lot of energy as well, and we could put a question mark, is this the way we should spend energy? So instead, I would say of saying you cannot or you should not, we should find mechanisms that sort out the most useful way to use the energy. And I think the market, which will always have to be as wisely as possible regulated, is the right thing. But I share what's the use of cryptocurrencies, and me as an economist, I don't really understand how they're working either, so I guess no one really can say what way they're going. What will I do for Sami? Well, I will not give any concrete promises. Well, I'm glad that, or I don't know if perhaps you think it were too many beautiful words, but I think there are too few beautiful words in the world. I think we should try to say things in a better way, but it should be followed by action. And that's what I'm doing when I'm not sitting here. Then I'm trying to do all the things I'm telling here from the stage, to do that in practical politics and influence. And I would say, or at least my experience, if you're into politics or into changing things, which in a way is into politics, even if you're not into party politics, you need to be very impatient, but you need to have a very long-term view. Then you will be very successful. Sometimes it even happens faster than you will hope. And when will it happen? I don't know. I'm just as frustrated as you in some question. I believe that quite many, when it comes to climate change, I don't think things are happening quickly enough. I think we need to speed up things, otherwise we will not make it. But I can see there are forces in the parliament and in countries that actually think it's going too quick. And I think this has to do with the basic things we, in a way, have discussed. Is people believing that this is being done in a just way, so that everyone is involved, that everyone take their part in what we have to do? So I'm just as frustrated, and I cannot give dates. I'm just saying that I'm a very impatient person, and I try to do things quickly, but I know it takes time.
Yeah, we need to be quick. The only thing which is quick is the climate change. But you have 30 seconds left to both respond to questions and maybe some concluding remarks. Åsa, next.
Okay. Good that we don't have interpretation. This will be quick. No, but to the ownership, I would say that from a Sami perspective, there is no question of the ownership of our lands. But I would say that we might not talk about the ownership in the same way, because in the ownership for us, it's the responsibility of taking care of our lands. And that is what we do, and what we advocate for others to respect, and what we mean to do, and what we will do also going forward. So in that sense, I would say that it's not a question of being up for the task. We are doing it. It's just a matter of also being included in the processes of land use decisions. So because we have been taking care of our lands, and we are continuing to do this. And I would say to the questions over here, this is why it's so important that we have a large youth delegation in the room. This is why it's so important that youth are in the room advocating and keeping us on track, because we need this push for the words not only being words, that the words are followed by action. So I would say thank you, and this is why we also from Sami Council and from the Sami Society keep having, making sure that we have youth at all levels present, because you do not settle for only beautiful words. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah.
Right, I'll try and be brief. First point, it's not only your lands that are being affected by proposals in the Green Deal and by what the European Union is trying to do. The Green Deal applies to 500 million people. It applies to 27 countries, and in fact more than that, because Norway and Iceland are also involved in that. So, you know, it is a general thing, and let's face it, climate change is not being caused by things that are happening in Arctic regions. So, you know, it is something that applies universally. There is less that has to change in the northern parts of Europe than in other parts of Europe, arguably. And you have particular issues that, thanks to the organisation of events like this and your excellent advocacy, we are now aware of and we are now taking into account. So I think that's the way I'd answer that question. Yeah, I mean, I made many notes here. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Yeah, so on the other point, I think what would I do to improve Sami rights when I leave here today? I mean, we have set out, as I set out in my speech earlier today, there are a number of things in our policy paper that are specifically aimed at trying to improve the rights of the Sami. And as I've said also, this is some of the things do not lie within our power as such. We are advocating strongly for free, prior and informed consent. But this is something that we have to persuade others to actually implement. So that is what we are doing. We're trying to persuade our member states and third countries to actually take these things that they've signed up to seriously, because we're all signatories to these UN conventions and to the ILO and so forth. So it actually needs to be followed through, and our job is to advocate very strongly for it. I would say on beautiful words, yes, I mean, in a way my job is to pronounce beautiful words, but I think the EU is actually better at beautiful words than most parts of the world, and I think I would genuinely say that we're a force for good, and I think we should work together on making these beautiful words into beautiful deeds if at all possible. And that's why it's so good, I think, that we have people like Eric, who is a member of the European Parliament from the north, and is actually actively advocating for this because he actually understands these things. So let's work together, basically. You are not being singled out. You are part of a policy that covers the whole of the European Union and beyond, but we are aware of your specific issues, and we will try our very, very best to deal with them in the most consultative way possible and the most inclusive way possible. Sorry, more beautiful words, but we mean it.
Thank you. Erik.
Thank you, and first of all, I wanted to acknowledge the good questions from the youth, the Sami youth, and but I wanted to react on 2 points. My experience after this session is that cultures are meeting each other, and Eric, you said that the people in the north are not the richest one. That might be true money-wise, but we are rich in other ways. We produce healthy, climate-friendly, nutritious, and quality food, which the world needs. And we are rich on culture and in other ways, and that's why my first intervention I spoke about Birgen. We use what we need, not more than that. So cultures are meeting each other now, and regarding the benefit sharing from the gentleman from Denmark. I started my first intervention with the right to self-determination. So I believe that first we have to start with the right to the free, prior and informed consent. And if the indigenous peoples give their consent, then we are able to discuss how to share the benefit of such industries. So it's a kind of order. First the consent, and then we are speaking about benefit sharing. And I also want to mention that that it's a committee on in the Norwegian side of a new mineral act, and actually the gentleman here, Rune Fjellheim, the former director of the Sámi Parliament in Norway, is sitting in that committee, and I know they are discussing about benefit sharing in that work. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. Sorry for going a little bit over time. I hope that doesn't complicate the rest of the program, and I encourage people to stay on to the closing. I know. So I thank the panelists and hand over to Susanna to conclude the rest of the panel. And this is the same gift as given earlier, so you just take over.
Before we leave for today, I would like to thank our hosts, Erik Bergqvist and Alvina. I would like to give the final word to you, Alvina. So, welcome.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, all the panelists. It has been a pleasure to listen to all of you. And I'm also happy to see all of you here discussing this very important theme of climate justice. And first of all, I must say that I'm very afraid of the fact that there is the climate crisis threatening all of our peoples, all of the planet, and yet some people are very willing to use our Arctic just as a reservoir of different resources. And this is definitely putting the big business in front of the interest of the people and the environment and the whole nature. And I think the key point is that the indigenous people, Sami people, all of you, you know how to treat the land. You know how to live in harmony with the planet and the ecosystems, and you know how we should save this planet. But I'm afraid that most of the decision makers are not willing to listen. But this week we are definitely working with that and trying to change that, so that the voices of the Sami people and everyone here are heard. I think too often, even in the European Parliament, we make a lot of decisions that are too accommodating for those who are already better off. So those people who don't have no money, those people who are from different minorities, women, indigenous people, they are worstly impacted of climate change. But they are not listened, they are listened the least. And I hope that here together we can be part of changing that, and I have believed in that, and I have believed in all of you. So thank you all for attending this event and the whole week, and let's continue the fight. Let's change this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvina and Anette, for those concluding words. I would now like to welcome Sara and Elvira Kupinen back again.
Okay, I want everyone here to stand up. And we are going to end this session in the same way we started it, with Joik. And this Joik We Speak Earth, Kunnalla Ätnamin, Sara Marielle had one message to everyone going to the COP meeting in Paris, and it was to Joik this and to have the same beat. So we all are going to York this now. So
Nico, Sara, Mira, and thank you so much for today, everyone.